Have you ever just stopped and wondered why did history unfold so differently across the globe? Well, one book, Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, came along and offered this simple, really powerful, and yeah, wildly popular answer. But it also kicked off a huge debate. So what did Diamond get right? And where do his critics say he went, well, spectacularly wrong? Let's get into it. The entire book was basically born from this one single question. It was asked of Jared Diamond by a man named Yali in New Guinea. And Yali wasn't asking about genetics or anything like that. He was asking about cargo. The stuff, the technology, the power. It's a question that gets right to the heart of global inequality, and finding a real answer became Diamond's mission. So what was Diamond's big answer? Well, it was profound, really, in its simplicity. He argued that for the last 13,000 years, the dice of history were loaded, not by people, but by place. At its core, Diamond's book was a direct shot at racist explanations for why the world is the way it is. He was saying, look, the differences in power and tech between societies have absolutely nothing to do with people being different. Nope. The answer, he said, was all about environmental determinism. Some groups just got a massive head start because of the random luck of the land they happened to live on. Diamond laid out his whole argument, like a set of dominoes falling, one after another. It all starts with that geographic luck. This lucky break gives you better plants and animals to farm, which then leads to food surpluses, right? Suddenly, not everyone has to be a farmer. Those surpluses let you build dense populations with specialized jobs, soldiers, inventors, leaders, which in the end produces the tools of conquest, guns, germs, and steel. And Diamond argued that Eurasia just basically hit the geographic jackpot. It had the best wild plants, like wheat and barley, just waiting to be farmed. And, get this, it had 13 out of the 14 big farm animals in the world. Cows, pigs, sheep, horses, the whole gang. The Americas, they had one, the llama. And because Eurasia is wider than it is tall, it has this east-west axis, which means crops, animals, and even ideas could spread for thousands of miles across similar climates. It was a massive advantage. But living so close to all those animals, well, it had a terrifying side effect. All these crowd diseases we know, smallpox, measles, the flu, they made the jump from livestock to humans. Now, over centuries, people in Eurasia built up some immunity through horrible, repeated epidemics. But for people who had never been exposed, these germs were an invisible and utterly unstoppable weapon. And the horrific power of these germs became terrifyingly clear in the Americas. When Europeans showed up, the diseases they brought with them, they wiped out an estimated 95% of the indigenous population. 95%. Think about that. Far more people died in their beds from sickness than were ever killed on a battlefield. This demographic collapse is what made conquest possible on a scale that would have been totally unimaginable otherwise. Okay, so it's a really elegant and compelling theory, right? It sold millions of copies. But, and this is a big but, despite its popularity, most professional historians and anthropologists now think the book is, well, deeply flawed. They say that while the theory sounds good, it's built on a foundation that's full of cracks. So the objections really start with Diamond himself. Critics point out that he's a biologist, not a trained historian. They argue he used sources uncritically, taking these, self-serving accounts from Spanish conquistadors as pure fact. They also say he fell into a confirmation bias trap. Basically, he started with his conclusion that geography is destiny, and then just cherry-picked the evidence to make it all fit, creating a story that feels just a little too neat. Diamond's most famous example is the capture of the Inca Emperor Atahualpa. He paints this picture of a tiny group of Spaniards defeating 80,000 Incas in a battle, all thanks to their awesome guns, steel, and horses. But historians look at that and say, whoa, hold on. There wasn't really a battle. It was an ambush, a kidnapping of an unarmed leader. The Inca Empire was already falling apart from a smallpox epidemic that had sparked a massive civil war. And, crucially, the Spanish had thousands of native allies who hated the Incas and wanted to see them overthrown. And the problems aren't just in that one chapter. Critics have found a whole range of factual errors throughout the book. He gets the origins of some diseases wrong. He kind of downplays how incredibly nutritious American crops like the potato were, crops that would later change Europe forever. And he repeats these old, debunked myths, like the idea that the Aztec Emperor Montezuma thought Cortez was a god, which just makes indigenous people look naive, and it's not accurate. So if geography isn't the single, all-powerful answer that Diamond proposed, Then what's the alternative? Well, a lot of economists and historians point not to the environment, but to the systems and rules that people create for themselves. Yeah, a huge competing theory, which is laid out really well in the book Why Nations Fail, argues that it's not your geography, it's your society's political and economic institutions that really drive whether you end up rich or poor. So, in their view, institutions are destiny. And this whole theory really comes down to one key difference. You've got inclusive institutions, things like property rights, rule of law, where lots of people can participate. Those encourage people to invest and innovate. Then you have extractive institutions, which are basically designed to funnel wealth from everybody else to a tiny group at the top. And that just kills long-term growth. It's not about what resources you have, it's about the rules you make to manage them. The classic example here is just look at the Korean Peninsula. North and South Korea, they share the exact same geography, the same climate, the same culture. But one is a thriving democracy, and the other is a terribly poor dictatorship. Geography can't explain that difference at all. But the huge, stark difference in their institutions, that explains it perfectly. It's a really powerful counterpoint to pure environmental determinism. So this all brings us to the book's really complicated legacy. What are we supposed to make of Guns, Germs, and Steel today? How do we balance its incredible popularity with these really serious academic flaws? You know, this quote kind of gets to the heart of why the book was so powerful. Diamond gave us this simple, elegant, grand story that just felt right to millions of people. It offered a compelling, non-racist answer to one of history's biggest puzzles. And it was so persuasive that for a lot of people, it just became the default explanation. So, in the end, the book's legacy is really twofold. On one hand, it was a total publishing phenomenon. It got millions of people excited about big history and thinking about the deep past. But on the other hand, among experts, it's kind of a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that a simple, neat story can be really seductive, but history's almost never that simple. It's a book that's absolutely still worth reading, just with a very large grain of salt. And I guess that leaves us with one last big question. In a world that's shaped by geography and culture and institutions and individual choices and just pure random luck, is it even possible for one single theory to explain everything? Or does that search for one simple key to 13,000 years of incredibly complex human history always end up leading us astray? Something to think about.